I come here on bended knee. There's a lot of that going around these days, as you know. For me, it means, bended knee can mean a lot of things. For me, it means I'm going to make an appeal to you. Bended knee can actually be a marriage proposal, as many people know, or it could be a respectful way for someone in a high-profile position to protest police brutality and injustice in our country. Now, I've never met Colin Kaepernick, but I will tell you he's a hero of mine. I'm in awe of him because I believe he took it upon himself to publicly promote the American values of liberty and life that we all cherish. His efforts raised awareness, but have also led to, as we all know, some pretty severe criticism. Because of his actions, Kaepernick has paid a very high professional price, huge. So I was happy to hear from someone recently that he's at peace with his decision. In fact, I've heard that he's been saying that if I'm never meant to play again, I accept that, but I had to do something. He had to do something. Since then, I've been asking myself one question over and over again. Where is the corporate Kaepernick? And by that I mean, are there any high-profile business leaders who are willing to take a stand or a knee to bring public attention to the lack of racial diversity in this country? I look at this room and it's filled with what we would all agree are quarterbacks, people who care. And many of us are doing a lot. But here's my question. How many of us are willing to move beyond caring to actually doing something? Now, before I go further, I want to be very clear. I am not a trained expert in diversity. I didn't major in gender or African American studies. I attended Princeton's Woodrow Wilson School of International Relations and Public Policy. I was originally going to major in math until there were no more numbers. I come here representing my firm, Ariel Investments, where all things being equal, I prefer to be here talking about our 4- and 5-star mutual funds. But as we know, all things are not equal. I came to be a diversity expert by virtue of my birth. And it's important to me, and I say this all the time, to live my life being unapologetically Black and unapologetically female. Years ago, some may know I gave a TED Talk about race, and so many of my friends of all races told me, don't do this talk. It could ruin your career. This is a subject that is just too dangerous and hard. But I have to tell you, I can't think of a single problem that got solved by simply ignoring it. I know race makes people uncomfortable, and talking about it makes them really uncomfortable, but that's kind of the point. I have this mantra that I live with. I tell people it's important to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Because I find that throughout our days, working, playing, whatever we do with our families, there are times when we experience great discomfort. And if we can relax into it, we can actually have better lives. So, even though I'm speaking to you today as a colleague, I would guess I'm much different than a lot of people in the room. A lot of us work in financial services, I know that. I don't know if any of you can remember seeing your first check. I remember mine. It was signed by my mom, and it was on the wall of the grocery store where we went to buy food because it had bounced. That's what I remember. I was the youngest of 6 kids born to a single mom who really struggled to take care of us. When my house was too noisy, which was often the case, I actually studied in our bathroom. I have to say, I always loved school. It gave me a lot of stability, and I was really good at it. I spent my early years at a Chicago public school in Chicago where I was probably one of 3 Black kids in a class of 25. And at one point in my career at that school, my school was designated the first international baccalaureate school in the United States, and I was picked. These programs, the IB programs, are known for catering to the children of diplomats. So what happened when my school was converted and I went to this new class, it was incredibly academically challenging, but even more importantly, it exposed me to students from around the world. And from that experience, I learned one really important thing, which is that when everyone is different, no one is different. And that was really interesting. I still appreciate the richness of diversity, and so does Ariel. So at my firm, each year, as part of our we read hundreds of annual reports. That's what we do. And they often, which I find so interesting, contain pages and pages about how much the company values diversity. But then when you go to the back of the book, to the who we are section, oftentimes what you see is one woman and/or one person of color bobbing in a sea of white men, who are often, by the way, named Bob. When we meet with companies to assess their investment worthiness, and we see the absence of diverse people, it worries us. It worries us when we think about the future of that company. So we often ask the senior leadership about it. And the answer that we often get is, we are working on it. Now, we are working on it is a perfectly fair response to a problem that you're trying to solve, unless you've been saying it for a very long time. If you've been working on something for 5, 10, 20 years, and your corporation hasn't made any progress, you have to ask yourself, what is going on? What does that tell you? Another answer we often get, this is one of my favorites, we still need to make progress on diversity, but in keeping with our commitment to others, we gave a donation to the NAACP. Now, I'm telling you, I've heard that one a lot. And I think it's wonderful to support the NAACP and other charities. But my company actually sponsors a Black Corporate Directors Conference where we bring together the Fortune 500 Black directors. And there we emphasize what we call the 3 Ps: people, philanthropy, and purchasing. And we talk about those 3 Ps as separate diversity initiatives. And I make that point to you because making donations is not interchangeable with hiring diverse candidates. It's just not. And you may be helping others, but the one thing I try to get people to see when they give me that donation example, you're not helping yourself or your company. At my firm, Ariel, 51% of our employees are people of color, and 67% of our senior leaders are women. Now, we don't do this because we're nice, although we are very nice. We do it because it gives us a leg up. We recruit some of the most brilliant students from some of the best colleges. And when these candidates tour our offices, they don't just see one person that looks like them, they see many of us. And this gives them hope, along with the ability to envision a path to success. And it gives us at Ariel a competitive advantage. Everyone in this room, I imagine, is competitive. And we all approach our businesses with a true sense of urgency. And I have to tell you, at Ariel, we have a turtle as a logo. And even at a firm with a turtle as a logo, where we talk about patient investing, we approach patient investing with a great sense of urgency. In that vein, I imagine that we all encourage our teams to aggressively pursue growth, aggressively to pursue profits. But the one thing I can tell you that I don't see is aggression when it comes to tackling diversity. So much talent is overlooked because people consciously or unconsciously can't see past skin color. It's not often a research study makes me cry, but this one actually did. It turns out college-educated Black students are about as likely to get a job as a white high school dropout. That is real research. Now, this is awful and ultimately leads to another grim fact. White families with a high school diploma have a greater net worth in our country than Black and Hispanic families with a college degree. Think about that. You're a Black kid. You're told the way to get ahead is through education. So you study your butt off. You rack up student loans, and guess what? You lose out on a job to someone who woke up like that. For those of you who don't know, that's a Beyonce reference. It's also been shown that employers expect more of minority candidates. We aren't allowed to just be good, we must be exceptional. You go through life feeling like you cannot make a mistake, and let me tell you, it is a lot of pressure. It's also much harder to take risks when you know there is no forgiveness and you cannot fail. Not to mention that any failure on your part could derail the path of people behind you. This gap is absolutely true of gender as well. Employers routinely perceive men as more competent than women, even when the data does not support the claim. So there's another study, and it showed that software engineers routinely evaluated code written by women as higher quality unless they knew it was written by a woman, and then they lowered their evaluations. Real data. Every business wants the best people, but the lens by which we pick those people is often fogged by bias. And sometimes that lens gets so foggy, we literally can't see what's in front of us. Now, I understand people make assumptions. I've told this story many times. The young Congressman Harold Ford and I once showed up at an editorial board lunch where he was being the guest of honor. He was the guest of honor. And we were led to a back room when we got there by the receptionist, mistaken for kitchen help, where she asked us, where were our uniforms? We still, I have to say, because it was actually a very funny moment, we laugh about that. But a lot of truth is funny, and it really does hurt. But what I don't get about this whole thing is when assumptions get challenged, some people choose to push back against reality instead of pushing back against the assumptions. The receptionist at the media company could not see the possibility of us. Too often, people can only see the surface and not the possibility that lives beneath the surface, the possibility that lives inside of all of us. And this is why we need to ask ourselves every single day, am I seeing the possibility in the entire population? I have a 4-year-old, and I tell her that she can be or do anything, just like my mother told me. But the one thing I also tell her, I expect her to believe that is true of anyone and everyone, that they can be or do anything. Imagine a society in which we all thought that of each other, where everyone had the benefit and none of the doubt. Now, along with being competitive, everyone in this room knows how to make things happen. I bet most of us agree the 3 most beautiful words in the English language are, you beat expectations. But when it comes to corporations adding diverse leaders, expectations rarely get beat. I'm not even sure the expectations are clear, and that's the problem. To hit a target, you actually need a target. And then you need to measure to see if your shots are landing anywhere near the target. If the numbers fall short, that's not the number's fault. Math has no opinion. Now, when a company fails to reach its goals in, let's say sales, they reassess. They change their strategy. They add incentives because we all know you get what you incent. In all other aspects of business, it's very, and I have a pun that's intended here, it's very black and white. The numbers are very clear. But when it comes to making progress on corporate diversity, companies don't seem to be attacking the issue aggressively, which brings us back to, we're working on it. Now look, I married Yoda's dad. My husband is George Lucas, and as many people know, in The Empire Strikes Back, Yoda famously said, do or do not, there is no try. Trying is not the same thing as doing. I have a friend, a CEO not in this room, who had a high-level opening that he wanted to fill precisely because every single member of his senior leadership team was white. And here's the amazing thing. The job was in corporate communications. It wasn't even in human resources. The CEO said he wanted someone with a different voice to offer differing perspectives. His search team came back with 3 candidates. None were diverse. They explained they tried, but they just couldn't find anyone. So the CEO made an executive decision. Big CEO. He said, well, we won't fill the position. Suddenly, they found someone. This is not a pipeline problem. This is a blind to possibility problem. I always tell people there are 300 million Americans. I actually guarantee there is someone out there capable of tackling or being trained to fill basically every job. I do believe that. And I've heard all the excuses, I have to tell you, when we sit with management teams, we hear them, which too often lay the blame on others. Not long ago, someone actually said to me, black people don't want to move to Phoenix. Now, public company CEO. Now, you know, the last time I checked, black people and all people welcome the opportunity to work with smart people for good pay. Trust me, Phoenix is not a deal breaker. At Ariel, we spend a good part of our day thinking about what makes a good business. And one of the many things we consider is diversification of product, services, markets. We look at that. In the investment business, we preach the benefits of a diversified portfolio. We talk about having a mix of stocks and bonds, real estate, private equity in a portfolio. But when it comes to diversification of people in an office, there is a disconnect, even though the same rules apply and will benefit you. A friend who was the editor-in-chief of a major newspaper told me a story about when he was overseeing coverage for a milestone anniversary for a city, his city. The city's population was majority minority, so the editor was shocked when two of his best reporters turned in a piece about the city's history and only profiled white people. He said in the history of his tenure, it was the only time he actually stopped the presses. And after that happened, he came up with a phrase that I love. He actually started to ask his team, is everyone in the room? We all need to ask ourselves, is everyone in the room? Is everyone at the table? If the answer is no, then I am on one knee asking you to make it a priority so that the numbers will jump not over the next 40 years, but by the next annual report. Which brings us back to Colin Kaepernick and his willingness to do something, which I believe is in the DNA of every American. Henry David Thoreau spoke about the importance of protesting injustice. He said, quote, "Disobedience is the true foundation of liberty. The obedient are slaves," end quote. The quote is even more impressive when you consider Thoreau lived in the 1800s and could have easily coasted on his white male privilege. Who else will be willing to use their high-profile position to call attention to inequality, to let their board and their teams and the public know that diversity is an urgent matter and that fixing inequality is critical to the company and to the country? I have hope. I really do. I'm one of those glass half full people. And I have a wish. And my wish is that 5 years from now, our combined efforts have made so many gains in this area of diversity that I get to stand up here and talk to you about superannuation funds in Australia and how great they are. Thank you.